In the heat of creativity, sparks fly and shadows take shape. We enter the dark hallways where makers turn terror into tradition. This is Working the Fright Shift.
Clock into Working the Fright Shift, the gateway between imagination and fear, with your host, Ted Doherty.
Hey everybody, you found your way to Working the Fright Shift. I'm your host, Ted Doherty, and our special guest tonight is Karl O'Connor, owner of the Nightmare Realm, a full screen park in Dublin, Ireland, and he knows firsthand how to carve fear from the dark. But before we pass him the storyteller's torch, let's visit this week's Horror Blueprint.
The Horror Blueprint, the art behind the fear.
I'm leading us into the deeply haunted corridors of literature. We're talking about the master of horror himself, Stephen King, the man who turned fear into an art form, who made horror not just about monsters in the dark, but about the monsters inside us. I have waited forever to do a deep dive on Stephen King. He is my favorite. He is my guy. I know there's full documentaries and all that kind of stuff on him. But as usual, this is just an overview, but I love him. King once said, "We make up horrors to help us cope with the real ones." And that's exactly what I'm going to explore. How his stories became the absolute blueprint for modern horror, and why his influence stretches far beyond any Pet Sematary gates. Stephen King was born in Portland, Maine in 1947, raised by his mother after his father left when he was just 2. Money was tight, but that didn't stop him from writing stories. He filled notebooks with tales and even published little pieces in his brother's homemade newspaper. By the time he was teaching high school English, he was still writing late into the night, chasing the dream that those stories might one day reach the wider world. And then came Carrie in 1974. Think about it. King threw the first draft of Carrie into the trash, thinking it wasn't worth finishing. But thankfully, his wife Tabitha rescued it, encouraged him to keep going, and the rest is horror history. Carrie was more than a debut. It was a cultural shockwave. A bullied girl with telekinetic powers, drenched in pig's blood at a prom, unleashing vengeance. It wasn't just scary, it was tragic, human, unforgettable. And it set King on his trajectory as the voice of horror for an entire generation. From Carrie, King quickly proved he wasn't a one-hit wonder. His next works showed just how versatile horror could be. Take The Shining. It's not just about a haunted hotel. It's about isolation, addiction, and the slow unraveling of a man's mind. Jack Torrance's descent into madness is terrifying because it feels so plausible. The Overlook Hotel becomes a living, breathing entity, amplifying human weakness into supernatural terror, and of course, Kubrick's film adaptation cemented it in pop culture, though King famously disliked the changes. Moving from haunted hotels to haunted towns, Salem's Lot, which is my favorite of his single novels, brought vampires into small-town America. What makes it so chilling is that King doesn't just give us monsters. He gives us neighbors, shopkeepers, and childhood homes, all slowly consumed by darkness. It's Dracula reimagined through the lens of everyday life, and to me, that is what makes it so unforgettable. And then there's It. Pennywise the clown is so iconic, but the real terror lies in the way childhood fears linger into adulthood. King captures the magic and trauma of growing up, showing us that the monsters we face as kids never truly leave us. The Losers Club isn't just battling a creature, they're battling memory, trauma, and the loss of innocence. And if It is about childhood, The Stand is about society itself. King paints an apocalyptic vision where a plague wipes out most of humanity, leaving survivors to rebuild or destroy what's left. It's sprawling, it's biblical, deeply human. The battle between good and evil feels mythic, but it's grounded in everyday choices. From the end of the world to the end of a family's peace, Pet Sematary is perhaps King's darkest tale. He admitted it was the novel that scared him most, and it's easy to see why. It terrified me when I read it. That last page, it's horrendous. It's about grief, denial, and the desperate urge to undo death. The horror isn't just in the resurrected cat or child. It's in the choices we make when we can't accept mortality. Switching gears, Misery traps us in a single room. A writer held captive by his number one fan faces psychological and physical torment. Annie Wilkes is one of King's most unforgettable villains, embodying obsession and control. It's claustrophobic, it's brutal, and a focus on the relationship between creator and audience. But King isn't just about horror. He's about myth-making. Salem's Lot may be my favorite novel of his, but the Dark Tower series is by far one of the best things I have ever read. It's his magnum opus, weaving together fantasy, horror, western, and philosophy. Roland, the gunslinger's quest for the tower is both epic, it's intimate, pulling threads from across King's multiverse. And for many readers, it's not just a story. It's a worldview. It's meditation on destiny and perseverance. And then there's The Green Mile. Here, King shows his softer, more humane side. Set on death row, it blends supernatural elements with deep compassion. John Coffey, the gentle giant with miraculous powers, forces us to confront justice, mercy, and the cruelty of human systems. It's so heartbreaking, but it's profoundly moving. Later on, King revisited old ghosts with Dr. Sleep. Danny Torrance, the boy from The Shining, is now an adult grappling with trauma and addiction. It's a story of recovery, of finding strength against psychic predators, and of healing old wounds. King proves that horror can also be about redemption. There's 11/22/63, a time travel novel where a man tries to prevent the assassination of JFK. It's thrilling, romantic, deeply reflective. King shows us that even when we tamper with history, the past has a way of resisting change. It's proof that his imagination stretches far beyond horror and into the very fabric of time and destiny. And then there is his character, Holly Gibney. She marks one of the most intriguing shifts in Stephen King's storytelling because she is a hero defined not by supernatural gifts, but by vulnerability, persistence, and a quietly brilliant mind. In a career filled with cosmic threats and paranormal spectacle, Holly's world is grounded in the unsettling reality of ordinary people committing extraordinary harm. And her anxious, observant, obsessive nature makes her both relatable and compelling. Her stories trade grand mythology for psychological tension. And as you know, King's influence isn't confined to books. His works have been adapted for film and TV more than any other author, including Shakespeare. Think about it. Carrie, The Dead Zone, The Shining, Salem's Lot, It, Pet Sematary, Misery, Cujo, The Mist, Silver Bullet, Dr. Sleep, on and on and on. But also, unexpectedly, deeply moving films. The Shawshank Redemption, Stand By Me. These aren't horror, but they show King's gift for human storytelling. As King said himself, fiction is the truth inside the lie. And those films prove that. And of course, not everybody loves Stephen King. I know it. Some critics dismiss his style, calling it too commercial. But millions of readers and filmmakers disagree. Over 400 million copies sold worldwide. countless adaptations, and a cultural footprint that is impossible to ignore. And let's talk about the bookshelf crushing reality here. King has published 65 novels and novellas, 7 of them under his Richard Bachman alter ego, 12 short story collections, 5 nonfiction works, and more than 200 short stories. If you stacked all of those up, you would have a Tower of Terror tall enough to rival the Overlook Hotel. And that's the thing. King doesn't just write horror. He writes life. He chronicles fear, grief, hope, and resilience in ways that resonate far beyond the genre. So whether you're terrified by Pennywise, moved by John Coffey, or swept away by Roland's quest in the Dark Tower, King's reach is undeniable. He made horror human. He showed us that the scariest monsters aren't always vampires, werewolves, or clowns. Their grief, addiction, isolation, and the darkness within ourselves. King once said, "We never cease to stand astonished at the things people will do to one another." That astonishment is the beating heart of his work. His influence is everywhere, in the books we read, the movies and TV shows we watch, the terrors we confront. And that's why I believe decades from now, when people talk about the builders of fear, Stephen King will still be standing tall, lantern in hand, guiding us through the darkness of a big tower inside the horror blueprint. The horror blueprint reminded us that fear is a living language, shaped by culture, sharpened by memory, and carried forward by the people bold enough to reinvent it. And now, we turn to somebody who has helped reshape that language for an entire country. This week's fear architect is Karl O'Connor, who not only owns and operates Blue Box Displays, a fabrication company, he is the creative force behind The Nightmare Realm, a full multi-attraction scream park in Dublin, Ireland that has received numerous prestigious industry awards. But Karl's journey is that rare blend of imagination and grit. What began as a passion for the eerie has grown into a highly celebrated scare experience, earning international acclaim for its theatricality, detail, and emotionally terrifying punch. Tonight, Karl joins us to explore the origins of his nightmares, the craft behind his creations, and the evolving future of Halloween in Ireland, which is exactly where Halloween was born. Karl is this week's Fear Architect.
Fear Architects, crafting worlds of terror.
Welcome to Working the Fright Shift, Karl. I appreciate you doing this. Thank you so much. How are you today?
Ted, absolutely fantastic. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, Karl. Where are you calling us from?
I'm calling from a very gloomy and wet southwest Ireland. So if I'm talking too fast or if my accent is catching you, just stop me and ask me to repeat.
Okay, I will. All right. Well, Karl, I have questions for you. Are you ready?
Shoot.
Okay. Well, when you think back to your childhood, what did Halloween feel like growing up in Ireland? Were there any traditions or moments that shaped your earliest memories of the holiday in Ireland for you?
Yeah, so I suppose the truth with Halloween, or Iahauen as we call it in Ireland, was that it wasn't that commercial back in the 80s in Ireland. I grew up in rural Kerry, which is southwest Ireland. It's a beautiful windswept mountainous area with like these mysterious lakes and jagged cliffs, and we're right on the edge of the wild Atlantic. And it's a beautiful place, but it's also deeply rooted in tradition and folklore and superstition. And we had that all year round. So when Halloween would come around one night of the year, it was kind of a case of, well, this is just another superstitious night. And there was no such thing as trick-or-treating. There were certainly no scare attractions or haunted attractions. Now, it was a time of the year where we would honor the dead and we would pray for lost relatives, but it was nothing like it is today. We had small traditions where we would have what's called barn brack in Ireland. So it's like this soda bread with fruit in it, but we had these little items that were actually baked into the bread. So we would have there was a gold coin, and that meant that you were going to have a fortune during the coming year. There was a wedding ring that meant you were going to get married this year. There was a P in it, and the P meant that you weren't going to get married. So a lot of people thought, well, that's a good one to get, maybe, especially when you're younger. But then it took a little bit of a twist in that there was also a stick inside in the bread. And if you got the stick, it meant that you were going to have an unhappy marriage. You were going to have constant disputes for the year. And then there was a cloth or a rag, which meant that the person was going to have really bad luck for or poverty for the year. So there was real jeopardy and superstition in picking your slice of bread on Halloween. It kind of reinforced the stereotypes that are built into Irish folklore, I suppose. We would play some kids' games like maybe bobbing for apples or snap apple and maybe do some quick homemade costumes, but it was nothing really elaborate. The costumes, looking back in it, were basically bin liners with eye holes cutting them, so black bin liners. It was a health and safety nightmare and quite horrifying to see maybe a bunch of 3 or 4 kids running around with black bags in their heads. It certainly wasn't very safe. Halloween in Ireland was atmospheric, I suppose, all year. You have to understand that the Irish have a psyche towards Samhain in that it's a nice, deeply rooted in superstition and ghost stories, and it's a nice where grandparents or your parents might tell a ghost story or two. And that was Halloween for me in the 80s growing up. Certainly not what it's like now.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Karl. I could listen to you talk about this stuff all day long. Thank you so much. All right. Well, as you mentioned, Ireland has this deep folklore connection to Halloween. Now, from your perspective, how would you describe what Halloween looks and feels like nowadays for somebody who hasn't experienced it?
Yeah, so Halloween these days is different for sure. It's a season where people are really enjoying the or celebrating the festivities with their friends and their family. And I think that's what scare attractions, as we call over here scare attractions, you call haunted attractions. It's what they do really well is they bring humans together, I suppose. We all crave connection and we all crave that moment where we can share an emotional response with each other. So people find that invigorating. So Halloween in Ireland now leans heavily into that shared experience. And it's more social and fun than it was when I was growing up, for sure. In that people want to dress up, they want to party, they want to have fun nights out or go to a cultural Halloween event. And it's really taking off. It is the home of Halloween. We're claiming it back.
Mm-hmm. Good.
And I think Irish people are throwing off the shackles of fear, which is kind of funny. We're throwing off the shackles of fear and superstition and embracing the aesthetic of Halloween in many different ways. Yeah, we have haunted attractions, scare attractions in Ireland, like the Nightmare, but there are many other events that are based in music and folklore and storytelling, bonfires, stuff that's based in Celtic tradition. We even have a festival that's dedicated to Dracula. So it's ever expanding, and Irish people are embracing it for sure.
I love to hear it. Now, speaking of scare attractions, what is the origin story of the Nightmare Realm? When did that spark first hit you? And what convinced you at that time that Ireland needed a full-scale modern haunted scare attraction?
Yeah, I wasn't convinced at the time we started that Ireland needed it. But the origin story, it's a little bit boring in that it dates back to 2007, 2008, around the time of the crash, the economic crash, and people became very risk adverse around that time. You know, the economy in Ireland is quite small. So I would have a background in building props and sets, and people were not buying them at that point. It just wasn't going to happen. So I was young and determined and ambitious enough, and I decided to build something for myself. So that's where the Nightmare Realm was built, and it was built out of scrap wood, old cars, and a lot of black paint. And so the Nightmare Realm opened in a town called Tralee in Kerry in 2009, and people really took to it. And the spark, I suppose, was, and I didn't understand this before I started. The spark was the adrenaline rush that we got as actors. And what I saw from the visitors going to the event, the spark that they had from seeing what we had built.
Hmm.
And it was like a contagious reaction, I suppose, at the time. It was very, very raw. It was very, it was not professional, but we saw like well put together people screaming and cursing like they never would in real life. They had lost all pretense of who they are in their normal life.
Hmm.
And that was just something quite addictive to watch. I mean, witnessing an actor running after a customer across a car park, it feels wrong. You shouldn't be watching this, but you can't look away. And in the early days, I could only dream of a full-scale attraction. But it was the audience's reaction that made me believe in what I was doing. So listening to them has brought us to where we are now. And I've always been a firm believer that when you listen to your audience, it brings you to the next level.
Were there any sort of attractions or events or experiences that kind of urged you, nudged you into creating something so ambitious?
Not at the time. So I had never been to a scare attraction
Okay.
before. They didn't exist in Ireland. But as a kid, I absolutely adored horror films. I loved them and I hated them at the same time.
Hmm.
I remember seeing cheesy films like The Blob, The Hound of the Baskervilles, or Dracula or Poltergeist when I was younger, and I remember being fascinated but terrified at the same time. So when the idea came to create a real life horror set, my imagination just absolutely went wild. Before building, I went research heavy into what I could find around the world, something that I wanted to create. And on YouTube at the time, there were some legends of the US industry that really were doing brilliant on socials on YouTube and showing off their events like Halloween Horror Nights, obviously, but
Hmm.
Bates Motel,
Hmm.
Netherworld, and I was watching their videos and their walkthroughs and going, "Oh my God, this looks incredible, and I've got to build something like this." So, in the early years, like I said to you earlier, we got a lot of our inspiration from American haunts, and we saw that we could possibly create immersive worlds like what they were doing. And it's funny as we have evolved and as we've pivoted back towards our own culture and folklore, our own Irish culture is what is our main sense of inspiration, I suppose, right now.
Wonderful. All right. Well, let's talk about where it's sort of at nowadays. So, for somebody stepping into Nightmare Realm for the very first time, how do you describe it? Not necessarily just the scare elements, but the atmosphere, the storytelling, the emotional journey.
Yeah, so it's completely different to how we started. We are a no-touch attraction. I don't believe it adds to the event, and people like their own personal space. So we decided, because of our earlier years, we were a full touch attraction,
Oh,
and we decided to pare that back. So no touch attraction, and the Nightmare Realm, to describe it, is like a dystopian town. It's full of different streets, shops, museums, secret doors, roaming actors, music, dancers, all enveloped by a town that has its own edge to it. It's not cheesy Halloween. It's not quite Ireland. It's its own entity, I suppose.
mhm.
And we use the town as the kind of focal point to deliver different mazes every year. So we build five different mazes that span off from this town every year. And I think that's one of our biggest strengths is that while we build everything from scratch every year, the mazes are always different. So when customers are coming back every year, nothing is repeated and it brings a freshness to the event. So the storytelling part of it starts from the minute you see one of our movie trailers online. We do our own little trailers every year. And when you see that, we see that as an extension of the event. And we try to bring the customers on a journey where they can step across the veil and I suppose suspend their reality for that little bit because that's what people want to do. They want to be able to enjoy themselves, suspend the outside world and the everyday world, and just embrace what's the Nightmare Maze. And
Yep.
I suppose it's a place for Halloween lovers. Number one, it's a place where people can celebrate and feel a connection, and it's a place of inclusion and acceptance and screaming.
I love to hear all of it. Now, You said it changes every season. So, what's your creative strategy when designing a new scene, a new room, maybe a new character, maybe a different narrative element?
Yeah, so the strategy it changes. So it depends on what we want to achieve year on year. So it's myself and Sylvia, my wife, we are the creative directors. She says she's the better creative director, but I like to think I
Okay.
am. So the strategy changes depending on what we want to do. So sometimes we start with the name for the attraction, or we might have an idea of what we want to achieve scare wise or what we want the customers to feel. So we try to capture the imagination of the audience first, and we can build it backwards then from the name. Or we go from the opposite end. We can start with an actor who we know is can deliver a performance, and we build a character. Then we build their story, we build their world, build their set, and the show builds up from that. You work through the creative process of why the visitor is there,
Mm.
and for what reason ties the narrative of the monster to the reason that the audience is there. Because the audience isn't just there to view. The audience, we find with our event, the audience is there to interact. It's to be a part of the show, not just to be a viewer of the event. So the creative reason is very, very important to us. And the journey, it must be a cohesive timeline that is delivered in a way that the audience can follow and understand. And most importantly, the audience must enjoy that timeline. It's hard to define the creative process. Sometimes when I'm asked about the creative process, I like to throw out the Hitchcock line. And it's like I did it because it felt right. So kind of just that's the end of it.
That's great, Carl. I'm right on the same wavelength as you. I love hearing all of it. But let's switch gears a little bit into blue box displays. For folks who are unfamiliar with that, this is a fabrication, your fabrication company. Can you talk a little bit about the pieces that you create? What does the fabrication process look like from concept to finished installation for you?
Yeah, so I have a background in animation and production design.
Mm.
So Blue Box Displays would have been, I think I started the company in 2006. Could be wrong on that. But it was a prop building company, a set building company. And as I said, it was mostly to build stuff for other people, doing activations for marketing companies, building big 3D billboards, building set for theater and movies. And then I wanted to be doing it for myself because you're debating X, Y, and Z with different people, and I wanted to be in control of my own destiny and what we were building. So our workshop at the moment is this crazy mix of Christmas sets at one side, and there's lovely garlands and there's lovely elf houses and glitter, and then the other side is it could be a scene from an autopsy room, and there's just blood and gore. So it's quite funny when we get deliveries to the workshop. All the drivers want to come in and they want to see what we're working on. So it's quite funny. But you asked about the creative process. So I suppose I still use pen and paper. I still love to draw. I use my animation blue pencil. I am still stuck to that like 20 years on. I I try to get the stuff out of my head and down on paper, what I would like to build or what I would like to create. And it's the easiest way then to convey it to the production team. We then bring that into AutoCAD, scale it up, engineer it, measure it, and that makes it easier then for the guys on the shop floor to bring it to reality. Sometimes we break it down into different sections so they don't quite know what the finished piece is, because sometimes people are like, oh my God, we can't do that. We can't do that. So yeah, but everyone trusts the process.
Do you design the haunted house scenes in a similar fashion in terms of drafting it out?
Yeah, definitely. It would be myself and Sylvia would do it. Sometimes she would take one maze and I would take another maze. And we would have our storyline first, and then we would outline, well, it's fine having a storyline, but what's actually going to be on the ground that customers are going to walk through and they're going to see, and what's going to convey that storyline. Because sometimes in a haunted attraction, it's hard to just depend on lines being delivered. So you have to be able to deliver it with your set, your scene, your smells, your sound, all that. So we would set aside maybe 10 different scenes that are pivotal to the storyline of that particular maze. And then we would go about designing what each of those rooms are going to be, what actors are going to be in those rooms, what's going to happen in those rooms. So it's a whole process that takes a bit of time. It's very technical when it comes to the end point, because it's like every millimeter is important to get everything in with
Mm-hmm.
spacing and with regulations and everything. I'm all over it.
Awesome. Now, for folks who have not checked it out, I recommend watching Carl's TEDx talk. He entitled it "All Monsters Are Human," and in it, Carl, you dug into the psychology of fear. So, what core philosophies guide you when crafting experiences that are frightening, but they're still fun, they're still safe?
As you know, and all Halloween operators or haunted attraction operators know, fear is different for everybody. But fear is one of the most primal emotions that we have as humans to feel. And what scares you might not scare me. I've always said that if an event doesn't invoke emotion in the audience, then it's not a very good event.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my opinion. You have to invoke an emotional response. So fear, but also the opposite of that in laughter, because they go very, very well together. So for me, a core philosophy is definitely emotion. If you can invoke emotion, then you're going to invoke connection between the actors and the audience, and everything else that goes with it. Another core philosophy for me is the unpredictability in haunted attractions. It's very, very powerful. An actor that is completely not what you would expect, or an act that is really uncomfortable, that throws you off guard and sets you up, and it plays havoc with your nervous system. The unpredictability in the set, whether it's the floor at a certain angle, the walls at a certain angle, the height of the ceiling, the smells. If you can make it incredibly unpredictable, I think that would be one of my core philosophies. And then really the overarching philosophy is entertainment. And I know that sounds like such a broad term, but if you're not entertaining people, or if that isn't your core philosophy, your number one philosophy, then I don't know.
I
I don't know
agree
why
with
you're
you.
doing it. I don't know why you're doing it.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Carl, just a couple more quick questions and then we
Okay.
can wrap it up. But technology, as
Yeah.
technology evolves, how do you see the future of your event, other scare attractions changing in the coming years? You've been at this now for a while. And
Yeah.
so, what do you think about the future and what it holds in terms of technology?
The nightmare, and we've been open for 17 years now, and we've seen a lot of changes over the years, and we've been lucky to travel to different worlds and see haunted attractions all over the world. There's certainly an explosion in technology, and the things that we can do now in attractions, whether it's Halloween attractions or immersive light attractions, or whatever it is, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. But we've seen changes and revolutions as well in only the last 15 year timeline with animatronics and stuff, where
Mhm.
they didn't replace actors, and they don't resonate with the audience. And we've seen that VR doesn't replace genuine human connection. So people are still going to want to get out and experience something real. When it comes to AI, I think it's a great tool when used correctly, but we need to be careful as operators how we use it. I don't know what it's like in the US, but we've seen over here in Europe where events are using AI to create these amazing, inverted commas, images of what the event is going to look like. But
Mhm.
when the audience goes to the event, it's nothing like what has been advertised.
Mhm.
So I don't know how an event person can stand over that then as their event.
Yeah.
So we have fallen into the realms of false advertising at times, and all it does is breed mistrust in certain industries. And I think we need to be very, very careful of that. And there's obviously some ethical issues, that
Mhm.
event operators can get into a lot of trouble over. But I think while AI is brilliant and it will do some amazing things with our lives going forward, I think it won't replace art, and it won't replace artists.
Amen. I agree with you, Carl. Carl, I want to get this out of the way before I forget. Where can people follow you or your journey or Nightmare Realm?
Yeah, so we're all over socials at the Nightmare Realm. So you can see us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. We're always there.
Thank you.
Send us a DM from wherever you are.
Karl, one last more broad question, just in general terms, looking back at everything that you've built and that you've created, what continues to excite you creatively? What new nightmares, themes, emotional experiences are you still eager to explore?
We have constantly things in the pipeline, which is great, and we have this long-term vision for what we want to do. I can't tell you too much about that, but when we do, I'll shoot you a message. I think for us, what excites me and what excites Sylvia, my wife, is when we are trying to design an event or trying to create an event for people. It's coming up with that one creative spark that opens the door of imagination to something that's big, something that's going to excite the audience. And when you get that one little bit of spark, I will call it, I think that's what really excites us. And we're gonna keep making events for a long time going forward.
Thank goodness. Karl, thank you so, so very much for
Thank you, Ted.
working the Fright Shift. Karl brought some seriously awesome perspective to the table. Karl, thank you again so much for sharing your amazing story with us. But now we'll move into where I look back at the projects, people, and turning points that helped me understand this industry from the ground up in this week's Echoes of the Past.
Echoes of the past. The origins of scare experiences.
Tonight, I'm unlocking one of my favorite evolutions in the world of scare entertainment: interactive scare experiences. These are the attractions where guests stop being passive observers, just shuffling from one dark room to the next, and instead become active participants in the story. They make choices, they take risks, and sometimes their decisions actually change the outcome of the narrative. For decades, haunted houses follow a predictable formula. Walk through a hallway, turn a corner, monster pops out, repeat over and over again. Fun? Right. Absolutely. I love it. But interactive? No, not really. Then creators began asking a new question. What if the guests weren't just walking through the story, but inside it? And this shift gave rise to attractions where guests had to solve problems, make choices, or physically interact with the environment. Suddenly, the scares weren't just happening to them, they were happening because of them. And this brings us to escape rooms. Escape rooms, as we know them today, trace their roots to the early 2000s, inspired by point-and-click adventure games and puzzle-based video games. The first widely recognized real-world escape room opened in Japan in 2007, created by a company named Scrap Entertainment. From there, the concept exploded across Asia, Europe, and eventually the United States. By the early 2010s, escape rooms were everywhere. And it didn't take long for creators to realize that adding horror into the mix made the experience even more thrilling. My first interactive scare experience inside of an escape room was probably around 2013, 2014, somewhere here in Southern California, and it was called Trapped in a Room with a Zombie. And the premise was super simple, and I thought it was brilliant. Our group was locked inside of a scientist's office, so this was a one-room escape room. And this scientist had discovered a mysterious potion, which unfortunately turned him into a man-eating zombie. He was chained to a section of the room, but every few minutes the chain released a little more slack. And if the zombie touched you, you were quote-unquote dead and had to step aside and watch everybody else try to figure this out. So not only were you racing against the clock, you were racing against a zombie who was getting closer and closer as time went on. It was chaotic, it was hilarious, it was terrifying. We had so much fun, but it was one of the first times I felt that perfect blend of puzzle solving, performance, and pure adrenaline. And some years later, sometime around that time, I did another horror escape room out here in Southern California called Zoe, which was like, I thought, a full-blown horror experience with live actors. It was super intense, theatrical, super, super fun. And these are just a couple of examples on how far escape rooms could push the boundaries of interactivity. I'm sure many, many of you have your own experiences with them. And of course, once everybody saw how escape rooms proved how powerful interactive scares could be, theme parks took notice. The first major theme park to introduce an upcharge, time-ticketed horror experience was Busch Gardens Tampa Howl-O-Scream in 2010 with an attraction called Alone. That first year, you had to go alone. And if you made it all the way through, you got a t-shirt to show you survived. So they were actually daring you to go through this thing. It leaned more on the theatrical side than interactive. I went the second year in 2011. And at that point, you could go through with tiny groups. So my wife and I went through it, and we absolutely loved it. But it opened the door for what came next, because the following year, 2012, Knott's Scary Farm debuted Trapped, their first upcharge, reservation-only horror experience. And unlike Alone, Trap did incorporate interactive elements. Guests had to solve problems, escape traps, and deal with pretty hardcore actors who were very much in their personal space. It was wild, it was experimental, and it returned for multiple years because people loved it. That ultimately led to things called the Skeleton Key Rooms that weren't only at Knott's, but other Cedar Fair parks around the country. And experiences like Trapped, Alone, and the Skeleton Key Rooms, these probably deserve a little bit more attention than I'm going to give it in this episode, so maybe I'll dig further into those things in a future episode. If you would like, let me know. But anyway, those things paved the way to the real game changer, I believe, that came in 2014, named Special Ops Infected, which was a new level of interactivity at a theme park. Knott's Scary Farm unveiled this attraction, which was created by my friend John Cook, and this thing was unlike anything the industry had ever seen. Knott's took the entire 6-acre Camp Snoopy midway portion of the park and transformed it into a massive open-world zombie laser tag experience. Guests were separated into small groups, armed with laser rifles, and led by super aggressive squad leaders through a battlefield swarming with live zombies. This was not a maze. This was not a show. This was not a scare zone. This was a full-scale interactive mission. It was shocking. It was amazing. Totally changed everything. And you weren't just reacting to monsters, you were engaging with them, shooting them, strategizing. They would die if you killed them. Moving as a team, it was intense, cinematic, absolutely groundbreaking. So this was only time ticketed. It wasn't an upcharge, but other theme parks took notice. After 2014, we saw laser tag style zombie attractions pop up at haunts and theme parks across the country. Everybody wanted their own version of that interactive action horror hybrid. And Special Ops eventually transitioned into a traditional maze format, still keeping the guns, but the impact was already made. It changed what a scare experience could be. Speaking of John Cook, after he left Knott's and launched Plague Productions, the first major project we worked on together was something truly outrageous: Murder Co. We billed it as America's first R-rated escape experience, and I believe it absolutely lived up to that description. So Murder Co. blended theatrical performance, escape room mechanics, and a deeply disturbing narrative about a high society black market company that allowed wealthy clients to pay to watch live murders. Guests playing the role of those voyeurs chose the murder weapon, how it would be used, and which masked killer would perform the deed. And then they watched the murder happen right in front of them. Absolutely disgusting. It was horrible. Of course, though, the twist was that Murder Co. wasn't just in the business of killing victims. They were in the business of body part harvesting, and, well, you are next on their list. And so once the show began, guests had to escape while being hunted by the company's deranged employees. It was absolutely repulsive, violent, but people really seemed to dig it. The sets were theme park quality, well, because they were created by theme park designers. The actors were incredible, and the interactivity was really intense. And looking back at it, I thought it was very ambitious, and we were incredibly proud of what was created. This is all back in 2018, somewhere around there, but Murder Co. has since been sold, so we're no longer involved, but it remains a perfect example of how far interactive scary experiences can go when you fully commit to the concept. Interactive scare experiences represent a major shift in how we tell stories in the world of live entertainment horror. They take the audiences out of the role of spectator and place them directly into the adventure. Suddenly, the fear is personal, the stakes feel real, and the memories last so much longer because you were part of the story. From escape rooms to laser tag zombie battles and full-blown R-rated interactive horror, the evolution has always been driven by one idea. Fear becomes more powerful when you're not just watching it, but living it. And that's why interactive scare experiences continue to grow, evolve, and inspire me and creators across the world. They remind us that the most unforgettable stories aren't the ones we're told. They're the ones we step inside, within the echoes of the past. And just like that, the lights dim on another shift. Huge thanks to our fear architect, Karl O'Connor of the Nightmare Realm. Within these stories is the blueprint of fear itself, how we face it, how it transforms us, how we create it, and sometimes how it sets us free. If you liked what you heard, do us a favor and tell a friend to tell a friend. Give us a good review, 5 stars, and help spread the word. Thanks for spending your nightmares with us. I'm your host, Ted Doherty. Beast wishes, and until we meet again, it's officially time to clock out of Working the Fright Shift. Working the Fright Shift is written and produced by Ted Doherty. No portion of this recording may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written and express permission of the producer. All opinions expressed in this recording are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the views of the producer or affiliates. For more details, visit www.workingthefrightshift.com. Copyright 2026, Ted Doherty. All rights reserved.